Hi there, welcome to another Elder Scrolls Legends video. My name is Moxfire, or Richard if you want to call me by my muggle name. Today we are doing another Beginner's Basics video. Today we're going to be talking about a couple of core key early game concepts that you need to learn. The first one is playing on curve and what a curve actually is, and the second one is the vanilla test for evaluating the strength of your cards. So to begin with, we'll talk about curve. This is a deck that I built that is probably not particularly efficient, so I wouldn't just copy this deck and try to run it on ladder, although it probably would work okay. Um, but the way that I've designed the deck is basically to illustrate what a curve is. So a curve is basically the consideration that you give to how many of each mana cost cards that you put into your deck. How many 1 drops, 2 drops, 3 drops, 4 drops, 5 drops, 6 drops, and 7 plus drops. Generally, you want a curve that is sort of shaped like this. You have a gradual rise from 0 to 1. You don't have too many 1 drops because you only have one turn where they're really high impact. It's great if you have them in your opening hand, but it is not absolutely critical. 2 drops you usually want the most of, or 3 drops depending on what style of deck, whether you're aggressive or mid-ranged. Control does sort of break a lot of these rules, but they have abilities that allow you to sort of circumvent your normal mana curve. But talking about real traditional, like play minions on the board, hit people in the face, these style of decks, they usually want more 2 and 3 drops. 2 drops are probably one of the most important drops in the game. If you look at the power of the abilities on 2 drops throughout the entire game for all of the playsets, they're some of the most high impact cards. 3 drops also are pretty high impact. It depends on if you're playing aggressive or more controlling style decks, or sorry, colors. For example, purple is a little bit slower, but they have really high impact 3 drops and not so high impact 2 drops, whereas green is really aggressive and has really high impact 2 drops and not so high impact 3 drops. So your 2 and 3 drops are probably the ones that you want to have the most of and want to consider making sure that you have a fair number in your deck, because the early game is pretty important. If you have nothing to play on turn 1, 2, and 3, generally you're going to lose the game. So you want to make sure that in your opening hand you do have 2 and 3 drops. Additionally, for those 2 and 3 drops, you want them to be good later on. So they have to have some kind of ability that does something other than just being a vanilla, like there's no written text on the card, 2 or 3 drop. Going into 4 and 5 drops, you want less and less of them. Once you get up to 6 and 7 drops, you usually don't want more than a few of them. This deck has very few, so this would be a very aggressive curve for a deck. We can take a look at another curve. This is another curve. It is a Spellsword Control. Control sort of breaks the rules of all of these. Basically, this deck plays really high impact 2 drops and 4 drops that slow down your opponent so that they can't hurt you and kill you until eventually you get to the late game cards. So there's a high number of 7 and 8 drops, an extremely high number when you compare them to pretty much any other style of deck. The other style would be a mid-range deck, which we can pull up now. This is a mid-range deck. This deck basically plans to stick high impact 2 drops supported by pretty good 3 drops, where the rest of the game, the rest of the cards are mainly focused on turn 5. Your most high impact cards are going to come out on turn 5, and this is when you have your real power spike. It's why it's called a mid-range deck, because it happens in the middle of the game. Control decks basically try to win the game after turn 10. Mid-range try to win around turn 5, 6, 7, maybe going on into 8, and aggressive tries to win before turn 6. So depending on what kind of style you want is the type of curve that you're going to have. The other thing we're going to talk about today is the vanilla test. So this is a really good way, especially in Arena, of evaluating the power level of cards. Pretty much the vanilla test is sort of a universal, well, maybe not universal, but it's prevalent in Hearthstone, where I came from previously, and it's very prevalent in this game. Creatures sit on what's called a power curve, and a power curve is basically, if something sits directly on the power curve, it is a good minion, it's a good creature. If something is above it, that means it's stronger than average, and if something's below it, it means it's weaker than average. Stone's Scrapper is an example of a vanilla card that is directly on the power curve. Generally, the testing rule of thumb for this is you take the mana cost of the card, you multiply it by 2 and add 1. So in this case, we have 4 mana. You multiply that by 2, which gives you 8, and then you add 1, which is 9. And the stats should add up to that number. So in this case, 4 plus 5 equals 9, which is the same as 4 times 2 plus 1, which equals 9 as well. So this creature sits directly on the power curve. It's a strong creature. It's always going to play well. It's not overpowered. It doesn't have any additional abilities, so you wouldn't consider it above it. And it's not weak. It will almost always trade for something, and it's a completely solid, good card to have in your deck. It's just not like the strongest cards that you can have. Using this tool helps you evaluate cards very well. So if we're using this tool and we look at other cards that are in the game, such as this card here, Young Mammoth. Young Mammoth clearly sits above the power curve, because if you multiply 3 by 2, is 6, plus 1 is 7, but if you add 4 plus 4, that equals 8. So it actually has one additional point above the power curve. In addition, it also has a keyword, Breakthrough. Generally, you can add around 1 point for a keyword. Although Breakthrough and Regenerate I don't really consider that strong of keywords, so I generally don't add an extra point to it. So this one would still be 8 points of stats, and for 3 mana that puts it above the power curve, so it's clearly heavily statted. Here's an example of a creature that looks like it is below the power curve, but actually this is a very good card. Fighters Guild Recruit is 2 mana for a 1/2, so 2 times 2 is 4, plus 1 is 5, but you're only getting 3 stats. But you also get 3 keywords. You get Guard, Lethal, and Prophecy. I pretty much always give Guard, Lethal, Drain, and Charge 1 extra stat point. So for Guard and Lethal, that gives it 2 extra stat points, plus the 3 for the actual stats that it has, puts it right on the power curve. And then Prophecy just boosts it up a little bit more. So this card is actually a little bit better than what it appears to be at first glance. So when evaluating cards, make sure that you actually take into account the keywords along with the actual stats of the card. I find this tool very useful when you're trying to compare cards during Arena. Generally, if you follow this vanilla test rule and try to craft or pick the strongest picks that are above the power curve, you almost always will have a really strong deck as long as you actually create a nice curve in your Arena runs, and using this tool will actually help you get really good results in the Arena. So try to take this out, take it for a spin, see how you like it, and just remember, don't do anything I wouldn't do.